The objective of Golus Mitzrayim, going down into Egypt, was not, God forbid, to punish or cause distress to the Jewish people. Rather, it was to create an opportunity for spiritual development and growth. In order to achieve that, there was a unique partnership between the majority of the Jews who became slaves and those unique Jews who remained above the slavery. All of that plays out in the story of who carried Yaakov's remains to Eretz Yisrael. Even Pasuk. The Pasuk tells us that who carried the coffin with Yaakov was his sons. That the sons of Yaakov carried his coffin to the land of Canaan. So Rashi says who stood where, exactly how it all worked. That they were divided, 3 of the sons on each of the 4 sides of the coffin. And the way that they stood around their father's coffin was the same way that they would camp around the Aron in the Midbar through the course of the 40 years in the desert. Now we're going to get to the part we'll focus on, and then Rashi continues with the following information. As Yaakov had ongesagt, that Yaakov instructed them when they're going to carry his remains, Levi lo yisa, that Levi should not carry the Aron, because Levi's tribe in the future is going to carry the actual Aron, the Aron that contains the Luchos. So therefore they should not carry the coffin of Yaakov now. But Yosef lo yisa shu melech, and Yosef should not carry because he's a king. So who would replace them? Menashe and Ephraim yutachteihem. So instead of them, you'd have Menashe and Ephraim. Now the words that Rashi uses over here are a little different to the medrash that he's basing himself upon, but in this Sikha, the Rebbe is not going to analyze, other than in the notes, it's not going to analyze the differences in the language. Rather, Darfim Pashtain, he's going to ask a broader question, which is, how come it is possible to suggest that Yosef's not going to carry Yaakov's coffin when you consider that it says clearly in the pasuk that the instruction to take Yaakov to Eretz Yisrael was given to Yosef? As Yaakov had bashvar in Yosef, and not only did he ask him to do it, but Yaakov made Yosef take an oath, that you will carry me out of Egypt to Eretz Yisrael, which means which means that the primary responsibility to get Yaakov Avinu to be buried in Eretz Yisrael is Yosef's responsibility. So surely then Yosef has to do everything possible to ensure that this actually happens, which means surely he should be one of the people carrying the coffin because it's his responsibility, it's on his shoulders. How then is it that Yosef is excluded from the oath that his father administered to him? It seems really self-contradictory. And the truth is, even with regards to Levi, it doesn't really seem to make sense, because when we get to Levi, we also have to explain Levi's position in carrying the ark or not carrying the ark, because the reality that the tribe of Levi would carry the Aron, that's going to happen hundreds of years later. Long after the experience of the subjugation and of course the Gulas Mitzrayim, and the truth is, even then when it comes time to carry the Aron, it's not Levi personally, the same Levi who is involved right here, it's his descendants. This is Levi, who's there quite a bit before the time of that generation that is going to be the 4th generation who will eventually leave Mitzrayim and have to carry the Aron. So why is Levi so far in advance not allowed to carry the coffin of Yaakov? Because his great-great-great-grandchildren are going to have to carry the Aron. Seems strange. Why would we take away the opportunity for Aaron to carry his father's coffin? Generally speaking, to be able to be one of the people to carry a coffin of a dead person is a mitzvah, so much so that the Gemara tells us that you are exempt from saying Shema if you're one of the people carrying the coffin. Especially considering that this is Levi, it's his father. There's an additional element of kibbud avim. So why would he lose the opportunity to participate in the honor of his father and carrying him to be buried in Eretz Yisrael because his great-great-great-grandchildren are going to be carrying the Aron? Doesn't seem to make sense. So the best way to explain this is that actually Yosef and Levi technically are carrying the Aron, even though they're not physically doing so. How so? Listen to the words that Rashi used. Rashi deals with this. The language that Rashi uses is Menashe and Ephraim would be beneath them rather than in their place, bim koimam, or just to make up the number. he says specifically tachteim, which means the main Rashi. Rashi intends with that to tell us not just to tell us, and now there are two gaps around the coffin, so they're going to be filled by Menashe and Ephraim. It's much more than that. Or because we have to have 12 people carrying the Aron, and Yosef and Levi are not participating, so we need 2 other people. But rather the key word over here is tachteim, which is a legal term, and it means it means that Menashe and Ephraim step in as the shluchim for Yosef and Levi, and as we know, shluchim shaladum kamoisoi. So therefore, if they have shluchim, if they have representative proxies who are carrying the Aron on their behalf, they're still fulfilling the mitzvah of getting Yaakov to Mitzrayim and showing respect to their father. So we're good. In other words, das heißt, as das, was Levi haben nicht getragen, Levi and Yosef haben nicht getragen our initial Yaakov, the fact that practically Yosef and Levi did not carry the coffin, is not been a and that's just practically that they didn't physically have it on their shoulders. B'tem kipshutai, in their hands. But they did fulfill the mitzvah and the oath that they had taken to Yaakov, that they would transport him to Eretz Yisrael, because they have shluchim, and we know shluchim shaladim kamoisai, and that literally means that the person is as if you're doing it yourself, so therefore they have fulfilled their requirements. And while we understand that that's what Rashi is telling us, it actually gives us another perspective, which is quite important, because Rashi Rashi began this by telling us that it is specifically Yaakov's children, not his grandchildren, who carried the coffin. Now that's strange, because now we're going to discover that it's Menashe and Ephraim who were part of it, and they are grandchildren. So how does Rashi reconcile the fact that he says grandchildren did not carry the Aron, but Menashe and Ephraim did carry the Aron? And even though Rashi says, well, that was a tziva, was an instruction that Yaakov Avinu gave them. He didn't want any Egyptian carrying his coffin, and also nor any of your sons, because their mothers came from families of Canaan, and therefore it's not respectful that they should be carrying the coffin. Menashe and Ephraim don't have this problem because they're the daughters of Osnas, who, as we know, traces back to Yaakov's own family. So it's not only that you could excuse, okay, Menashe and Ephraim are okay because they don't belong to, or they don't track back to the daughters of Canaan. But there's another side to this. He said, I want you, the sons, specifically to carry the Aron. So how do you satisfy that? By having Menashe and Ephraim do it. Well, Rashi deals with that. Once Rashi tells us that the fact that Menashe and Ephraim are carrying the coffin is in place of, or as proxies of, Yosef and Levi, not al shluchim from Levi Yosef, well, then you fulfilled Yaakov's requirement, which is, I want you, my children, to do this mission. You're doing it. Even though physically it's Menashe and Ephraim who are carrying the coffin, Menashe and Ephraim are not there in their personal capacities. They are there representing Levi and Yosef, and therefore technically it is Yaakov's sons who are carrying the coffin. And that fits the principle, which is that a person's shliach is as if they themselves are doing it. Even Rashi himself tells us this information. So that helps explain technically how Menashe and Ephraim step in place of Yosef and Levi. What we haven't discussed is, from a spiritual perspective, why don't we want Levi and Yosef carrying the coffin, and why would Menashe and Ephraim be the suitable replacements for them? Yes, of course, you're going to tell me that Yosef is a king and Levi in the future are going to carry the Aron, but there's got to be more to it. So, we need to understand on a deeper level. Well, the first thing that makes most sense is that Menashe and Ephraim could stand there as representatives of Yosef, obviously, because it's their father, right? Because it's logical to say that children can represent and even replace their father in a particular role. But what's the link between Menashe and Ephraim and Levi? There doesn't seem to be any obvious reason why Menashe and Ephraim could be worthy representatives of Levi. So to understand that, let's go back and understand why it is that we said that Levi should not be carrying the coffin. Well, you know what? Once we say that Levi is not allowed to carry the coffin because they in the future are going to carry the Aron, there's a massive and glaring question. we know a very famous Levi who did carry a coffin. How come he wasn't exempt? Because of the principle of you're going to carry the Aron. So there's a well-known question, but Divrei Rashi, Levi lo yisah she'aseh l'aseh Aron. So the commentaries on Rashi point out, hey, hang on a second, Rashi, you're telling us that Levi cannot carry Yaakov's coffin because in the future he's going to carry the Aron, or his descendants will carry the Aron. Moshe Rabbeinu himself carried Yosef's coffin. And that's came first because of Pasuk tells us clearly that Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who took Yosef's remains with him. Moshe was from Levi. Now, if the principle is that somebody who's going to in the future carry the Aron is not allowed to carry a coffin, why is Moshe Rabbeinu carrying Yosef's coffin? Not only is Moshe from the Shevet Levi Bichlal, but more specifically under Tzu noch von Bnei Kahas was eine gewend in Aron. Out of the families of Levi, Bnei Kahas are the ones who had the specific responsibility to carry the Aron when they traveled from place to place. Moshe belongs to Bnei Kahas. How could he possibly be carrying Aron Shel Yosef? So we need to understand there is a deeper significance to the concept of taking Yaakov out of Mitzrayim. It's actually going to change the reality of the Jewish people, and not everybody can play a role in that shift. The Bir B'chol Zed explanation is this. Since Yodor, we know as Aschalas Hashibud b'Mitzrayim hat sich angefangen nach B'tiras Yaakov. We know that it was only after Yaakov Avinu passed away that there were the first signs that there would be subjugation to the Egyptians. Rashi sagt, Rashi himself tells us, B'tchilas HaParsha, he tells us right at the beginning of the parasha that when Yaakov Avinu passed away, the Jewish people, literally their eyes and hearts got clogged up by the stress of the subjugation to Egypt. Because now with the passing of Yaakov, that's when they began to impose themselves onto the Jewish people. In other words, das heißt, Yaakov seine Mitzrayim hat aufgehalten die Tzoras HaShibud. As long as Yaakov is in Mitzrayim, that delays and prevents the stress of the Shibud in Mitzrayim. Yaakov did not allow the possibility of Golus even while the Jews are in Mitzrayim. It's not given Golus from Canaan. The only thing that they did experience was some kind of spiritual decline because they had left the Holy Land and they were now in Mitzrayim. But there was no subjugation. Because when Yaakov had gelebt, as long as Yaakov Avinu was alive, the Jewish people didn't lack anything in Mitzrayim. In fact, to the contrary, they actually had the best land in the whole of Mitzrayim. They were living a charmed life as long as Yaakov Avinu was around. Now, therefore, it's verstandig. That helps us to understand what's going to happen when Yaakov Avinu is removed from Mitzrayim to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. As das Aroisnem and Yaakov von Mitzrayim, the act of taking Yaakov out of Mitzrayim, if bringing him likfura in Eretz Yisrael with the intention, of course, to bury him in Eretz Yisrael as per his request, is given noch hashlav. That is another phase was hat Geirem given us as kennen sein the Golus v'shibun Mitzrayim, which allowed the Golus Mitzrayim to be activated. Take Yaakov out of the equation, and the Golus kicks in. If he says moving, was Levi and Yosef haben sich befell nicht mishtate given in a Siyas Aron Shel Yosef from Mitzrayim. Once we understand that principle, that it's taking Yaakov out of Mitzrayim that is going to facilitate the next development of Golus in Mitzrayim, then it's immediately clear why Yosef and Levi can have nothing to do with that. Because an akudah mishutefes gefindt man by Levi and Yosef. Levi and Yosef have something in common, which is was beide seine given hecher von dem Inyan Hashibud b'Mitzrayim. They were both removed from and beyond being captured and being imprisoned in Mitzrayim. Und beide haben nicht zugelost es soll sein Shibud Mitzrayim, and they both had an effect also to delay the full brunt of the Golus in Mitzrayim. We know that the Medrash tells us about Yosef. As long as Yosef was alive, they did not have the burden of Mitzrayim. For obvious reasons, Yosef is respected by the Egyptians. He has power in Egypt, whereas Yosef as soon as Yosef passed away, immediately there was some level of subjugation by the Egyptians. That's why at that point in time, the Torah reiterates the expression that they arrived in Mitzrayim in the present tense, because when Yosef passes away, it's as if now they get into Mitzrayim. Now they start to experience the pressures of Mitzrayim. So Yosef is outside of the experience of slavery, and he prevents the experience of slavery. Levi is similar in two ways. I'm going to get it, Levi. Rashi tells us with regards to Levi, why does the Torah feel that we have to know how long Levi lived? In order that we should know how long the slavery lasted. As long as any of the Shvatim were alive, it was not the full-blown slavery. As the Torah tells us, first Yosef and his brothers passed away, and only after that was there the new king with the new decrees, Paroi. And Levi was the person who lived the longest. Therefore, it's until he passes away that there's no real slavery. So again, Levi is also removed from the experience of slavery. Not only that, even with regards to the rest of the Levi tribe, even after Levi himself had passed away, even when the slavery and all of the disruption and the pain of Mitzrayim started for all of the other Jewish people, we know that the Shevet Levi was always exempt from any of that slavery. So Levi represents something which is completely immune to and above the power and the subjugation of Mitzrayim. So if Yosef and Levi are beyond the reach of Mitzrayim, it makes sense they cannot participate in taking Yaakov out of Mitzrayim, which will facilitate the Shibud. Now it makes sense why Levi and Yosef may not carry Yaakov's coffin out, because Nasias Aaron Yaakov from Mitzrayim is verbunden and gerim zu minyan Shibud. But as we've already noted, taking Yaakov Avinu out of Mitzrayim is a cause of this part of the slavery in Egypt. It's got nothing to do with Yosef and Levi. It cannot be part of their reality, it cannot be part of their life story, because they are outside of, beyond, and immune to the whole experience of the Shibud, certainly not people who contribute to the Shibud. And Rashi alludes to that in the reasons that he gives us why these two people could not carry the coffin. The reason Levi doesn't carry the coffin is because his descendants will carry the Aron, which has the Eibish's luchas in it. And Yosef doesn't carry because he currently is a king. So Levi because of something in the future, Yosef because of his current status. So the Mefarshim point out that the reason that Shevet Levi did not experience any shibud at all was because they would have this unique position of carrying the Aron in the future. So to put it into the language of the Das Kenim, that the tribe of Levi were wise enough to understand that they needed to remove themselves from the Shibud so that they would have the opportunity to effectively subjugate themselves only to the Torah and therefore carry the Aron. In other words, if you are somebody who is earmarked to be able to carry the Eibish's Aron, you are automatically exempt from Shibud. And the easier one to understand is Yosef. Yosef is the king, so needless to say, Egypt has no authority and power over him. To the contrary, he's the one who has power over the whole of Mitzrayim. So it goes without saying, if you're the one who has power over the whole of Egypt, you certainly are not going to be subjected to the power of Egypt. So therefore Yosef obviously has nothing to do with Shibud. Now, the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu carrying the coffin, the remains of Yosef, is not only different to carrying the remains of Yaakov, it's actually the exact opposite, because the notion of carrying Yosef's remains is actually to create a sense of Geula. Because Yosef's instruction was, the Eibishter will, at some future point, remember you, take you out of Mitzrayim, and then you take my remains. In other words, taking him out of Mitzrayim is a sign of Geula, the exact opposite of taking Yaakov out of Mitzrayim, which is the sign of the beginning of Golus. Over is a Shaykh Dafka to Shevet Levi. So therefore, who's the most appropriate person to carry Yosef's remains? Shevet Levi, who are not embedded inside the Golus. In fact, the most appropriate person to carry Yosef's remains is the individual who's taking the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, the head of Shevet Levi, Moshe Rabbeinu himself, because Yosef's remains represent Geula. Now, if that is all true, if Yosef and Levi are so beyond the experience of Golus, then why do they have to have shluchim representing them carrying the coffin? Surely they should have absolutely nothing to do with this funeral procession. Which is why our question now goes in the other direction. Seeing as Yosef and Levi had absolutely no relationship to the Shibud HaGolus, therefore they shouldn't have taken the coffin of Yaakov. But das is Hefech Inyanom, because the idea of Yaakov leaving Mitzrayim, which precipitates the Golus, is the exact opposite of what Yosef and Levi are all about. So why do they then have to have representatives? And how could these people actually be their shluchim? A shliach is supposed to be like the person themselves. These people themselves are not in any way part of the Golus. So how can Menashe and Ephraim be their shluchim to carry the ark, which is part of the Golus? So in order to understand that, we have to understand the unique partnership that had to happen at that time, and what lies behind that partnership is appreciating the goal of Golus Mitzrayim in the first place. So let's first ask a broader question, which is, if the Eibishter made a covenant with Avraham Avinu, which said, all of your descendants are going to be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years, how was there an exempt part of those descendants? Shevet Levi. How does it work? The Eibishter made a covenant, and the covenant was, you, Avraham Avinu, your descendants are all going to be strangers in this foreign land. So how did Levi escape that? Nachmer. In dem Shibud is doch included the Avtocha, the way that the Eibishter designed it is, you have to experience the Shibud in order to be able to have not only the Geula, but the great wealth that comes with the Geula. Because as Rashi says, we don't want Avraham Avinu complaining that Eibishter, you fulfilled the part of the promise where you said that they're going to be enslaved, but you didn't fulfill the part that they're going to have tremendous wealth. So how then could any part of the Jewish community escape this? Now there are people who say that the Shevet Levi did not actually take any rechush out of Mitzrayim. We don't follow that opinion because ultimately Medrash tells us that there wasn't a single Jew who left Mitzrayim without tremendous wealth. So what's going on over here? Is Shevet Levi part of it or not part of it? Are they included in the Bris Ben Absarim or not included in the Bris Ben Absarim? Should they have shluchim? Should they not have shluchim? The explanation is this: there's a partnership. The fact that Shevet Levi did not suffer the slavery of Egypt does not mean that they had absolutely nothing to do with the experience of Golus in Egypt. Now, das Gufa is a prat in the Meifan Hashibut von Eden. The fact that Levi are not enslaved is part of the broader picture of what it means for Jews to be in the Golus and Shibud Mitzrayim. Why? Because the objective of the slavery in Egypt was not to cause distress to the Jewish people, but rather the purpose was because this would lead to an elevation. The fact that after having been through the terrible experience in Mitzrayim, they would emerge an exponentially different people on the other side. Mitzrayim is given Akura Barzo, the Akur Kipshutai, was gepelt as That's why we call Mitzrayim this iron furnace, where the objective of a furnace is to refine metals. And so the Jewish people come out as refined beings. They're in a completely different state. That was the purpose of the Golus, not to cause distress, but to refine and elevate us. Now, obviously, Levi needs to be part of that. And also, in order for that to work, you actually need a segment of the population to behave differently to everybody else, which means, let's say that you put all the Jewish people into this terrible slavery. It's a high-risk choice because it's possible that it would be so overwhelming and so overpowering that not only would the Jewish people possibly not achieve the objectives, which is to elevate themselves, but who knows, how do you prevent the Jewish people from being completely swallowed up in this highly toxic environment of Mitzrayim, which is so depraved? In order to facilitate a lifeline that would keep the Jewish people from completely sinking into Mitzrayim, there has to be a segment of the population who doesn't get stuck in the Shibud in the first place. That group of people, which is Shevet Levi, their job is to consistently inspire the Jewish people to remember that you're going through this not for the sake of slavery, but for the sake of being elevated, not for the sake of suffering, but for the sake of coming out with tremendous resources, both material and spiritual. Und das gewinnt die Aufgabe von Shevet Levi. That's the responsibility that Shevet Levi had. Wie der Ramban is mevoyer, as the Ramban tells us, as every single nation has their wise people, their priests. Therefore, Paro was able to accept the idea that the Jews, even as slaves, have to have their people who, so to speak, preserve their culture and guide them and inspire them. And that was all guided by the Eibishter, so that there should be Shevet Levi who would not be sucked into the Shibud, so they could keep the Jewish people's heads above water, so that rather than us becoming completely overwhelmed by the experience in Mitzrayim, we'd be able to elevate ourselves through that experience. That then now shows us, as is nicht der Pshat, as nicht alle haben genommen an Anteil in Shibud Mitzrayim. So we shouldn't think that Shevet Levi was completely removed, exempt, immune from the experience of Mitzrayim, and not every Jew was in Mitzrayim in Golus. That's not true. Ihnen seinen gekommen kein Mitzrayim al sein Am. The Jewish people entered Mitzrayim as a single homogeneous nation. Ein Metzias, one entity. Because the Pasuk says, Kol nefesh l'shein yochid. Habo Mitzrayim yeshivim. That the 70 people who came down to Mitzrayim are called nefesh in the singular because they're all united. And therefore every single Jewish person participates in the Golus together, even though they don't all have identical experiences. Not thereby is given against shutvis, but there was almost as if you could say a partnership between the different segments of the Jewish community. But how you make it through this period of the subjugation and slavery. When you have partners, so the idea of partners is you're good in a particular area, so you do that part of the partnership on my behalf, and I'm good in a different area, I'll do that part of the partnership on your behalf, and therefore we don't both have to do all things. Better way to explain would be human anatomy, where every part of the body does its particular and uniquely assigned task in order that the entire body should function. So you have those who are slaves, they're doing that part of the and then you have those who are Shevet Levi, their job is to ensure that the Jewish people keep their focus. So the majority of Jewish people had the suffering of slavery in Egypt, which would then bring about this tremendous elevation that could only come through that suffering. And Shevet Levi, and how does Shevet Levi participate in the Shibud Mitzrayim? They empower the Jewish people. Being the teachers of Torah, the lamplighters. And therefore, if they were able to ensure that the people don't sink into and disappear into this dark hole of Mitzrayim. But rather to guide them that they should get the best value out of their experience, difficult and painful as the experience is. And by the way, Shevet Levi retained this kind of role both in the Midbar and later in Eretz Yisrael. Shevet Levi did not get land in Eretz Yisrael. Nor as the Rambam says, Shevet Levi was separated from the rest of the community to always be there, guiding the rest of us how we should behave, even in Israel. Havayu hunachlos, as the pasuk says, that the Eibishter is there, that's their inheritance. And you see that. You see that that's what Shevet Levi did. They serve in the Mishkan. They carry the Aron. They work in the Beis HaMikdash. So they still remain in this partnership role. Because really every single Jew should have participated in the Mishkan. But the way that David designed it is that Shevet Levi becomes the shluchim on behalf of the entire Jewish people, because we have this so-called partnership running between us where the whole Jewish world is invested in elevating the material world, while Shevet Levi is in a holy environment to keep inspiring us. In other words, the avodah to turn our world into a home for Hashem, which can only happen if you're invested in the world, that's the responsibility of all the other Shvatim, because Levi has to remain in this pristine environment. And because there's a partnership, Shevet Levi benefits from the tremendous elevation that happens through the experience of the slavery, even though they're not slaves themselves. So there is this absolute partnership between the two segments of the Jewish community, and it's important to understand what each role is. Now, with that information up, now we understand why Yosef and Levi both had to have representatives, Menashe and Ephraim, who would then carry the coffin of Yaakov on their behalf. As we've already noted, Yosef and Levi, because of their particular role in the story, where they don't get invested in Mitzrayim, therefore they cannot carry the Aron, because they cannot be the ones to precipitate the Golus. But as we've already noted, their job is effectively to inspire and guide the other Shvatim that they shouldn't drown in Mitzrayim, that they should keep their focus. That's their job. So one of the ways in which they do that is they dispatch shluchim on their behalf to participate in the Golus experience, carrying the Aron, which is going to begin the Golus process. And therefore, the people who step in on behalf of Yosef and Levi are specifically Menashe and Ephraim. Because they are people who represent and continue the work of Yosef and Levi. First of all, the Keach von Yosef, because their job is to take the power of Yosef and Levi, who are beyond the Golus, and bring it into the experience of Golus, so that we actually survive the Golus and thrive through the Golus and achieve the objective. And you can actually see this very obviously in the way that Menashe and Ephraim's life began. As Menashe and Ephraim sind geboren geworden in Eretz Mitzrayim, und Yaakov ist dort angekommen. Menashe and Ephraim are born into Mitzrayim. They're born there before Yaakov gets there. They're very much invested in the Mitzrayim experience, and therefore Yosef and Levi can use them as their representatives to say, you're in the world of Mitzrayim, but you're going to carry our power so that you can elevate the world of Mitzrayim. And now we're going to drill down further and say, the distinction between Yosef and Levi, yes, both of them are immune from or above the experience of Shibud HaGolios or Shibud Mitzrayim, but Yosef and Levi are two different personalities, and their interaction with Mitzrayim is different. Therefore, therefore you have to have two different shluchim, Menashe representing Yosef and Ephraim representing Levi, as we'll see in a moment. The explanation is this. First of all, let's talk about Yosef. We know that Yosef and Yaakov are extremely close. The pasuk tells us, told us Yaakov, Yosef, that the descendants of Yaakov are Yosef. In other words, Yosef encapsulates everything that Yaakov is all about. So Chassidus explains that what that means is that all of the concepts of what Yaakov achieves at the greatest spiritual heights, Yosef is able to draw down into and manifest into our world. By Yosefin, what you see with Yosef is that even when Yosef goes into Mitzrayim, which is the most spiritually unhealthy place to be, he lives in Mitzrayim with this consciousness of Yaakov's reality, which is a completely spiritual reality. And because you can identify in Yosef's conduct in Mitzrayim that he's living with Yaakov, who is completely beyond Mitzrayim, it's Mitzrayim Yosef, that's why Mitzrayim cannot affect him, cannot harm him, cannot limit him in any way, because he's living with Yaakov's clarity. Not only that, not only is Yosef immune to the impact of Mitzrayim, but he actually is in control of Mitzrayim and is able to prevent the Golus of Mitzrayim, because Yosef is completely plugged into Yaakov. Yaakov is completely beyond Mitzrayim. That's why only when Yaakov is taken out of Mitzrayim does the Golus begin. That's Yosef's reality. Shevet Levi, as immune as they were to the effects of Mitzrayim, had no power in Mitzrayim. And unlike Yosef, Shevet Levi lives through the slavery and all its difficulties. And yet they don't sink into, and they're not stuck in Mitzrayim. So von Shevet Levi, von Shevet Levi haben ihnen bekommen den Keach auf Durchdrung dem Kesh Kanal. In fact, not only are they not stuck in Mitzrayim, they're able to empower the rest of the Jewish people not to be stuck in Mitzrayim, as we've already mentioned. And they're able to empower the Jewish people to extract the light that comes out of darkness, which is a far superior light. Until eventually they produce the people to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. Levi is the one who empowers the Jewish people to turn the Golus around and to break the Golus effectively. Und von die zwei Jahren kommen heraus in und durch seine Schluchim, die zwei Fane Avodah from Menashe and Ephraim. So we've got these two realities. Yosef, who's completely plugged into Yaakov's reality, beyond Mitzrayim, can't be touched by Mitzrayim. He actually has power over Mitzrayim. And Levi, who's invested in Mitzrayim, but is able to turn things around and extract the light and get us Geula. So that relates to Menashe and Ephraim. And you can see this in the names of Menashe and Ephraim, which the Rebbe has explained in a different sikha as well. Menashe, how did Menashe get his name? He was called that because Yosef says, that the Eibusha made me forget all of my distress and the things that happened in my father's house. It's a reminder of the fact that I'm in Mitzrayim, I don't belong over here. Mitzrayim is a place that makes you forget where you came from. And it's a place I don't belong. I've got to get out of this headspace as quickly as possible. Das drückt euch sein Tshuka verhechlet nicht zu vergessen, not zu sein zugebunden zu Beis Avi. Yosef is making a conscious decision over here. This is a place that could make me forget my father, could make me forget my home, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to remain plugged in regardless. Was das ist von Avoida, was hat nicht zu bewirkt werden von der Sphäre, doch bleiben zugebunden zu Beis Abi. In other words, the name Menashe represents the work that Yosef did, that all of us should do, to ensure that we do not get drowned by what's going on in the world around us, or by Mitzrayim in this case, but we remain constantly plugged in to our source, to our awareness, to our value system, to our Father's house. Which means, a Jew has to know, if I'm in Golus, this is an environment that wants me to forget who I am and where I come from. And so that awareness that this is what Golus is trying to do to me will in turn ensure that I don't fall for the trap and I don't forget where I come from. At the head, I recognize this is not where I belong, but I should be in my Father's house. That's really where I belong. That's my place. Matzim to the avodah von Yosef, that's exactly aligned with Yosef's avodah. But Zayin de Mitzrayim is by him given Yosef's reality. Inside Mitzrayim was on Hatzichon gehert der Ashpah von Yaakov Beisavi, that he was constantly conscious of Yaakov Avinu. Was Hecher von Golus v'Helem v'Hester from Mitzrayim, and Yaakov is beyond Golus, beyond the Helem v'Hester, and therefore Yosef is never a slave in Mitzrayim. He's always empowered and even has power over Mitzrayim. By the way, that's why in Parshas Vayechi, that's why Yosef argues that Menashe is the primary son and he should get all the brachas from Yaakov Avinu. Mitzad avodah von Yosef is the ikra avodah avodas Menashe, because Yosef saying, from my perspective, the primary way to serve the Eibishter is the Menashe way, which is to recognize I don't belong over here and I'm higher than all of this and it can't trap me and it can't hold me back and I'm going to be in control of the situation. That's Yosef's reality. Whereas Ephraim's name is something completely different. That's what Yosef says, that the Eibishter has given me the ability to grow and succeed in the place of my distress. In other words, in Mitzrayim. In other words, that's recognizing the value that a person gets out of being in the difficulties and darkness of Golus. To the extent that in the Golus, you're exploding with success. Und die Avodah kommt und wird nicht von der Avodah von Shevet Levi. That is very much the kind of Avodah that is associated with Shevet Levi. Was bekochen wir Shlichusim haben ihnen übergemacht im Cheshach HaGolus v'chashe ya'anoise ken yirbe v'chen yifroitz. Shevet Levi empowers the Jewish people that you're in Golus, you're being enslaved, you're being abused, and in that environment, you're exploding in numbers, and you're being a very productive nation, and having children beyond the natural order. So that's Ephraim's, so to speak, symbol. Now, Yosef, the Pasuk tells us that the Jewish people are compared to Yosef, even very non from B'Shem Yosef. In fact, was sometimes called collectively by the name Yosef. And the Rambam tells us that all of us technically belong to Shevet Levi, at least spiritually. As Kedugma Shevet Levi is called Ish V'ish Asher Nod V'Ruchai Hazin Iskadesh Hashem Chelke V'Nachlos Yichulei. That any person is capable of dedicating themselves to the Eibishter in the same way as Levi does, and then we become the holiest of holies. That means we all have a Yosef and Levi component to how we serve the Eibishter today. And therefore the take-home lesson for us is, just like back then, the way the Jews were able to escape the Golus, and even while they were in the Golus, not to completely fold under the pressures of the Golus, is because of the Yosef and Levi elements in them. We all have that in us. So therefore, when we're in Golus, not only does the Golus not control us, but to the contrary, we actually control the Golus. Und in dem Sinne fahren die zwei Tages, there's two ways that could happen. The first thing is, like in the story over here, Yosef at the time of Yaakov's passing was already a king. So we have to recognize, I am already a king. It means to say, I already have power. We have to take a position which is, I am greater than the Golus and anything that it could throw at me. And therefore I'm not concerned by all of the challenges that Golus hurls my way, because I'm beyond all of that. I am Yosef, but I don't stop there. Und danach Osid, because there's something else. Levi also doesn't participate in the Golus because it's something that would still develop in the future, which means there's a part of me that still has to develop. I developed to an even higher state of commitment to the Eibishter. Levi Shasid Laseis Aron, represented by Levi carrying the Aron. What's inside the Aron is Torah. When a person has Torah in their life, Torah which illuminates, that assists a person to be able to turn the darkness of Golus into light, as Shevet Levi did, right? That the Eibishter causes the darkness itself to be illuminated. So these are the two things that we're supposed to do. Firstly, take a clear position that we are higher than the Goddess who can't harm us. Second of all, to learn Torah so that we can illuminate and transform the Goddess. We will succeed in doing this in a clear and open way when we bring Mashiach. Which at that time even night will shine like day. And that should happen, should happen immediately, of course, through our avodah, standing firm and saying the Goddess has no control over us. To the contrary, we're going to turn the Goddess from darkness to light.